may the words of my mouth and may the thoughts of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, because you and you alone are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So the 23rd Psalm, interestingly enough, is taken from what we call the Psalter. That's 150 Psalms. Now, let me ask you a question. I want your interaction with me here. Are these just randomly put together, or is there a method, if you will, to the gladness of the Psalms? There is a method? Well, let me give you an example as to why that's true. There's Psalm 22, 23, and 24, and Psalm 22 tells about the God who was, Psalm 23, the God who is, and Psalm 24, the God who will be. Now, why did I put God with a dash instead of an O? God's name is too holy to spell it out. So that's why a good observing Jew will never write out God. They'll put G-D, because God's name is holy. So as we're exploring the 23rd Psalm, I hope that you're going to learn some things. I also hope that you can find some things to apply to your everyday life. That's the whole goal, right? So we're going to begin by looking at the first part again. We'll review some of that and keep moving gradually on. Where does it begin? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not. Now, as I've been saying in this, we are more influenced by King James than we are the original intent of the Scripture, because King James wrote the most beloved version in what year? 1611. And so this idea of the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, is a King James notion. And guess what? It's not in keeping with the original language, which is Hebrew. The original language uses a word that is translated into English as lack. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. El-Shar means lack. So, Dallas Willard says this, and I love this line because I think it's really helpful to us. A life without lack is a life in which one is completely satisfied and sustained no matter what happens, no matter what happens. That's why the book that he authored before his death, Life Without Lack, is really helping us see that this is a picture of what it means for the Lord to be our shepherd. Now, David was a shepherd, and he said, the Lord is my shepherd. He knows what it means to be a shepherd. But guess what we are not as likely to embrace? We love the idea that the Lord is our shepherd. What's harder for us to embrace is that if there is a shepherd, then there must be sheep. And who are the sheep? We are. And for some reason, people are really offended by that. Because sheep have a certain reputation, and we think we're human beings. We have a better reputation than sheep. But the whole point of the 23rd Psalm is that the Lord is our shepherd and we are sheep. And therefore, why can we say that we will not have any lack? Because what's the next stanza? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. And again, that's King James. That's not original Hebrew. The Lord doesn't make us do anything. So this idea that the Lord is going to make us lie down, no. Good shepherds create conditions where sheep will naturally lie down. They'll desire to lie down. They will want to lie down. Now, what is it that sheep and human beings have in common? 3 major things. Do you see why I have to do review? Because sheep and human beings have these 3 major things in common. Sheep are very sensitive to what's happening in the flock. Sheep are very concerned about how they're comparing to the sheep around them. We call that keeping up with the Joneses. Human beings are very aware of how they're stacking up. Human beings are very aware of peer pressure, right? Are you all with me this morning? And human beings are very prone to that. So are sheep. Sheep are known for anxiety. So are human beings. I've been saying this, and I'm going to keep saying it. What is the primary way in which human beings come off as stupid? Are we stupid? No, we're not stupid. Why do we often come off as stupid? Because of our anxiety. What happens when we're anxious? We go into the reptilian brain, and we cannot remember what we know. And the same thing happens with sheep. Sheep are known for anxiety. They're known for worry. That's the third one. They're known for being skittish. They're known for needing a shepherd. So when the psalmist, in this case David, says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I do not have to worry about ever lacking," he says, because he will lead me beside still waters. He takes me to the green pasture. He makes me lie down there. What's the green pasture, you remember? A little sprig of grass. And that little sprig of grass will sustain that sheep for a little bit and then move on, and they'll have enough till they're full. And the green pasture is not lush. It is a little sprig of green popping up. And what's the point? That God will provide for everything we need, but not our greed. So there's food and there's water. Why does the psalmist say he leads me beside the still water? Because why do sheep need still water? Because they're skittish, they're anxious, they're worried, they're afraid. And that's how they live most of their lives. And guess what? So do we. We are more often than not afraid and worried. We are more often than not anxious about our lives. And anxiety is the robber of life. It robs life for the sheep, and it robs life for us. Now, if somebody has an anxiety disorder, which I happen to believe every human being has an anxiety disorder, it's just a matter of degree. But after the first service, I had this person say, "Thank you for talking about anxiety. I have an anxiety disorder, and I've always felt like I'm the oddball." And I said to her, "You are not an oddball. Everybody has anxiety. It's just a matter of degree." But for the person who struggles with anxiety, what does it mean? It means that we need help lowering our anxiety. It means that we need somebody to come alongside and reassure us and remind us of the things that we've forgotten. So, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. He takes me to the green pastures because He's invited me there, and I eat until I'm full, and then He takes me to the calm waters because I get scared if there's too much noise. And you know what else happens to the sheep when they go to the rushing waters? They lean in, and the rushing water gets absorbed into their coat, and it sucks them in and drowns them. A good shepherd never takes sheep near running water. They will not drink. And what do we know about water? Is it more important to drink water than to eat food? You can survive longer without food than you can water. Now, are you getting this picture? That David is saying, if we really believe that the Lord is the shepherd of us, and we are the sheep of His pasture, He will make sure we have everything that we need, but will not be attentive to our greed. And there's a critical difference. But then, what does the psalmist say? He restores my soul. Now, did all of a sudden he switch the metaphor here, talking about sheep and then all of a sudden talking about people? No. In the original Hebrew, what is he talking about? The fact that sheep get lost. Now, how do they get lost? One bite at a time. Why? Because they don't trust the shepherd to provide for them. Because as I shared with you, the green pasture in Israel to this day, a green pasture is not lush with food. It's a little bit of food here and a little bit of food there, and there's enough for each day. And when the sheep says, I am convinced that the shepherd's not going to take care of me, one bite at a time, that sheep will leave the fold. And what does that mean for you and me? I'm convinced, just like sheep don't bolt and run and leave the flock, I don't think human beings do either. I'm of the opinion that human beings get lost one bite at a time, one decision at a time, one act at a time. And the sheep lose their way one bite at a time until they're lost. Now, the gospel lesson for today shows us as Jesus talking about what happens to lost sheep. Read it with me, please, would you? Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost. Now, are you getting this picture in light of the 23rd Psalm that Jesus is trying to teach us something important about lost sheep? Lost sheep matter. Now, there's no sense here of, I am so terribly put out that these sheep get lost. I'm so mad that these sheep can't get their act together. I wish these people would just figure it out. Why don't they just pull themselves up by the bootstraps and get things figured out? Is there any sense of that in this passage? In fact, as I have been sharing with you in this sermon series, the most common image of Jesus, the most common image of Christianity is Jesus with a sheep around his neck. And what is restoration of the soul? It means that the shepherd is going after the lost sheep and is not put out, is not frustrated, is not seeing this as a waste of time, is not bothered, is not annoyed, but passionately pursues the sheep and is willing to leave the others behind. Now, I'll talk to you next week about why a shepherd can do that. But I want you to look at this image very carefully, because when the sheep is lost, either because of one bite at a time, they will overeat. And that means that they will be indulging. Now, we as human beings don't do that, right? And they will overeat, and you know what happens to a sheep? Jeremy's going to show us. This is what happens to a sheep that is overeaten because they have gotten lost. We call that downcasting. Downcasting is the sheep, and we need to stop it before Jeremy this time, because you get the idea here, that's a downcast sheep, and the downcast sheep is unable to turn itself back over. And the downcast sheep will panic. And when we, like sheep, panic, guess what happens? It makes it worse. And they're unable to breathe, and they suffocate themselves in a matter of minutes. And they are completely dependent on the shepherd. Let's go ahead and stop it, Jeremy. They're completely dependent on the shepherd in order to get back on their feet. The problem is when they're in this position, they're panicking and they're bleating. You know what a bleat sounds like? Kind of like that. It's annoying, it's loud, it's shrill, it gets everybody's attention, and it's their way of saying, help, 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 help. And isn't it interesting that shepherds of old, from ancient times to today, all call that being in a downcast position? Now guess what? Human beings get in that position too. Don't we? That was the first way in which a sheep was considered lost. Eating too much, they're top-heavy, falling over, bleating. If the shepherd didn't come within minutes, they were dead. When the shepherd arrived on the scene, the shepherd would have to massage the legs. If the shepherd simply turned the sheep over, guess what would happen? Fall down, unable to walk. So the shepherd would start massaging the legs, and then the next thing that the shepherd would do is put the sheep on his shoulder. If you could go back to that image, please, Jeremy. And that's the whole point, is that the lost sheep is tenderly cared for by the shepherd. And the shepherd is bearing the burden of the sheep, carrying the sheep, because the sheep cannot care for itself. One of the biggest lies that has been spoken in the name of Christianity is God helps those who help themselves. That is a lie, as illustrated by Jesus, the tender shepherd, taking care of the sheep. Because there are predicaments in life where you and I cannot help ourselves. And we are completely dependent on the good shepherd, either directly or indirectly coming into our lives and starting to bring the blood back, if you will, by massaging the legs and putting us on his shoulders. And I believe that happens either directly from the good shepherd, or he uses one of you to do that, or one of us, where we tenderly go and we don't judge and we don't criticize and we don't condemn, and we say, I really could have been sleeping, but you called me at 3 o'clock in the morning. I really don't appreciate. There is none of that in the Gospel of Luke, as Jesus is teaching about the tenderness of the shepherd who goes and not only seeks out the lost, but then does what? Rejoices. If only I could preach the gospel well enough, it would offend us. You mean Jesus will leave the good sheep for the bad sheep? And then rejoices? That's the tender shepherd. That's why he's tender. That's why he's a shepherd. And I want you to look at the icon. I love this icon because what do you see? What does Jesus do with the sheep? Is there any distance communicated here between the shepherd and the sheep? Do you see any distance there? Now, this is a time for interaction. Are you looking at the icon? What is the shepherd doing with the sheep? Holding on for dear life. And the early church said, we want to communicate that the tender shepherd will hold on and never let us go. And then look at the sheep. What does the head do? Rest. An anxious sheep will not rest his head. He's at peace. The shepherd is not annoyed. And the shepherd's holding on, and then look at the hands of the shepherd. What do you see? Nail marks. The shepherd will do whatever it takes for one sheep or one humanity. No matter what it takes. So when David is teaching us, the Lord is my shepherd, I don't have to worry. I don't have to be anxious. I don't have to be afraid. He is going to make sure I have food. He's going to make sure I have water. He's going to take care of my needs. He will not pay attention to my greeds. But He is the tender shepherd. And then he restores my soul. You see, in the early church, and I'll talk more about this next week because I'm out of time, but this idea of body and soul as separate is not a Christian concept. You say, well, who cares? What does it matter? I'll tell you next week why it matters, but I want to close with this. The shepherd who restores the soul is the shepherd who recognizes that we're not perfect. We don't have it all figured out. Are we smart? Yes. Are we always wise? No. I close with this. Just 2 weeks ago, after the first sermon on this man came up to me and said, I want to know how Jesus can be my shepherd. I said, ask. Well, is it really that simple? Yes. Oh, it can't be that simple. I said, it's really that simple if you are wanting a relationship. But if you're wanting religion, it's a much more complicated process. So you see, it's just ask if you need a shepherd. And why is it that Jesus is wanting us to ask? Because he pursues us with a passion, but he will not overcome our free will. He will not go where he's not invited. That doesn't mean he's not knocking on the door of our hearts. It simply means that he honors our dignity and our humanity. So if you want Jesus to be the shepherd, just ask. And do you think there will be any hesitation on his part? Let's stand and pray, shall we?